Buongiorno, buonasera, buonanotte, buon pomeriggio a tutti. Today we're going to go with English as we have a guest that I welcome, Ali Shourideh. Let's hope I pronounce the last name properly.
Yeah, pretty good.
Well, there you go. I passed my first test. Ali is a professor of economics at Carnegie Mellon, Graduate School of Business Administration, I think it's called, or something like that. We just call it
used to be called it. Now it's called Tepper School of Business.
Oh, it's true. They got some millions. They all have a name now. Yeah, Booth, Ole, Temple. He's a graduate of Minnesota. He just reminded me that he was part of the last cohort I admitted at Minnesota before leaving that beautiful place and moving down south. And so we haven't crossed really, even if we crossed partially. But here we're crossing. So Ali is from Iran, and I've been asking around friends that from Iran, colleagues, that if they wanted to give an evaluation of what the situation is, given that at least I'm a bit confused. I don't know whom to trust and how to read some events. Some things are very straightforward, others are totally not. And Ali has kindly agreed. So thank you, first of all.
Yeah,
for
sure,
your time.
anytime.
So, well, let's start from there. What do you think the situation is now after the shutdown or strike or general strike, whatever we want to call, of yesterday?
So I should say I share your confusion also, in the sense that obviously I'm in the US, I'm not in Iran, and so I don't have first-hand information. All the information that I have is second-hand through sort of media that I kind of trust. Most of that media I don't think people in the West have access to, because partly it's all unofficial sources, and as far as I know, it's still no foreign news agency is still active in Iran. And so, you know, I do share your confusion. The last, some of it at least, the last round of strikes, it does seem like I think one of the things that seem to be happening is people who are inside the government, they keep waiting for this thing to sort of fizzle out, to sort of pipe down, people kind of getting tired and so on and so forth. But at least right now, there doesn't seem to be any sign of that. There seem to be lots and lots of strikes in pretty much every city that I can think of. You know, petrochemical factory workers have stopped going. There is reports of strikes by truck drivers, particularly transit truck drivers who, you know, are part of, I guess, the transportation system in Iran. You know, people closing up shops, people going on the streets, students, you know, gathering inside universities. At this point, it's hard to see it being a full-fledged revolution, meaning we don't see, as far as I can tell, we don't see big crowds of people. For example, the type that we saw during the 1979 revolution. We don't see that size of crowds gathering, partly because of the brutality of the government. Kind of people very worried about their lives, and so what we do see is a lot of decentralized protesting happening. But what we also do see is that it is happening all over the country, in rich cities, poor cities, big cities, small cities, you know, cities with ethnic minorities. It's just everywhere.
So your view is this, I don't know, there was something that I thought was reading, that this is not an insurrection, let's say, in the sense that the number of people on the streets and the type of things are not attacking directly the palaces of power, but that this is widespread and it's generalized. It covers all social groups and so on.
Right. Well, again, I think it's we have to be careful. I don't know exact, so I'm not a political scientist, so I don't know the definition of what is it, when do we call a movement protest? When do we call it insurrection? When do we call it revolution? What I can tell you
No, I
is,
understand. Yeah, well, I guess.
there are all these definitions. I don't want to get bogged down into those details, but what I can tell you is that it does seem like the movement has a lot of support, even among people who are not actively protesting on the street. What we do know is that people who are protesting on the streets are typically younger people, as young as high school girls, all the way to people in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And what we do know is that there is a lot of support. This is just based on, spectators watching, spectators getting shot, spectators getting beaten up, all of those things. So in the sense that, is this a civil movement? For sure. Is it at a point that's going to topple the regime? I don't think it is right now at that point. But is it probably the biggest sort of series of protests that the Iranian government has faced since 1979? Of course, I think that's true. This is probably what we have to compare it to is the 2009 Green Movement. So 2009 Green Movement was, it came out of a disputed election where, one of the candidates who, a lot of people in cities, more educated, higher income voted for, was announced very quickly, announced the losing side. And so people sort of didn't buy that. And then there was also some kind of aggressions against his campaign, against people who were politically involved with his sort of agenda and ideas. And so people came out on the streets. The protests, they basically lasted about a year and a half. So we were seeing protests up until 2010. And but it was only, I would say, initially it was in big cities, and then eventually it was only in Tehran. And so it did become very brutal. The guy who contested the election result has been in house arrest, in the past 13 years, effectively. But I would say that compared to that, and there, of course, back then I was younger, and in one of my trips back to Iran in one of the summers that while I was a PhD student, I was also in one of those protests. In any case, I would say that this is more widespread, and the key thing that I think makes this very different from the other one is the fact that this is centered around women.
So it is a fact. It's centered around the status of women, the role of women, the rights of women.
That's right. That's right. I think so. Yes. Yes, I think that's right. I think.
And so, so this beats a bit my intuition in the sense that my view is that at the very end, the strength of the regime is that it offers to about half of the population one great justification for abuse and power, which is, well, you have essentially the right to dominate your woman, or the other half of the sky. You're saying that's not the case. I mean, obviously, as we see, there's a lot of males in the fight, right. And one would say, well, maybe it's because of the economic policy, the restriction, the propaganda, the oppression, the variety of things, the lack of freedom of press, freedom of thought, you can't smoke a pot, whatever. Right. But in your view, this is really centered about the status of women.
So, okay, so I think I should give you a little bit of a background story of how sort of the Islamic Republic has found popularity and how it's promoted sort of its agenda over the years. So I think by all measures, when you think about the Iranian Revolution of '79, that was a popular revolution. the measures that of course, data is all messed up because you can't trust anything that comes out of the Islamic Republic. But my understanding, you can, for example, look at statistics like participation in elections as a measure of popularity of the government, and all throughout up until basically like 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, participation in elections have been around 75, 80%, which is way higher than, for example, what we see in Western democracies and so on and so forth. And so, of course, I think there might be a little bit of correlation there. But I always took that as, people broadly sort of accepting the basic principles of the Islamic Republic, at least as a whole. But I think the 2009, of course, was a big hit. Big chunk of population, especially in cities, especially among more educated, higher income, people started sort of doubting this, the sort of viability of this sort of system of government in delivering what they've been looking for, which is they wanted to be able to travel to the West. They wanted to sort of have relationship with the US. They wanted to have good relations with Europe and so on and so forth. They wanted to sort of not be this, pariah of the world, this quote unquote bad guy, as George Bush called it, the axis of evil, and so on and so forth. And so I think that the popularity of regime basically got a huge hit, especially among the educated urban population. Then over the years, basically, I think that the Islamic Republic, I think what they made a decision on is that, all right, so we can't convince these urban, young, intellectuals, middle-aged young intellectuals to support us. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to basically find our support in the more religious, lower income, less educated rural areas. And we keep these guys not from toppling us by just fear. And so after 2009, pretty much any opposition party that was slightly in opposition to the views of the supreme leader was basically either banned, its members were put in prison, and so on. So these were sort of the quote unquote reformists. So all of those political opposition basically it just created this sort of unified, they've been unifying the government over time. So since then, the popularity has been kind of nosediving. The last presidential election, I think, again, I could be wrong, but participation overall in the country was about 50%. 50% of people who could vote voted. In Tehran, I think that number was around 35%, which is, Tehran is about 10 to 12 to 15 million, roughly speaking. The whole metro area is around 15 million people. And so these are signs that the regime has been extremely unpopular, as becoming more and more unpopular. And so I think when they were kind of hoped that, I think this was the government's calculation was basically, all right, we need to do the nuclear deal. They've also been doing this sort of nuclear program. They had to sign the nuclear deal. Yeah. Of course, Trump walked out of it, and they've been thinking, all right, so we have to sign this deal with the West. Russian sort of the war on Ukraine kind of I think surprised them, because basically what happened was the deal was I think about to be signed, and then the Russians came and said, of course there are different stories, but Russians came and said we need to be able to go around the sanctions in our dealings with the Iranians, and of course the sort of European countries, they all said no, and so that was a big hit to their economic agenda, to the government's economic agenda, because they had to get rid of a whole bunch of like subsidies on wheat, subsidies on various other imports, and so on and so forth. And so they, this sort of low income, low educated, more religious rural population, they sort of realize that if you want to have them have their support, you cannot support them economically. So they sort of, what's interesting is starting at the end of the summer, they kind of cranked up the sort of enforcement of religious laws, sending people to holy sites in Iraq, have these huge crowds of people, putting them in buses and send them to all the Shiite religious sites in Iraq. This was all, I think, part of this agenda to try to sort of tell to their supporters, look, we can't do anything about the economy because we can't sign this nuclear deal, but let us do this thing of enforcing the hijab laws and so on and so forth. And I think what they were not
so that's
on,
your view, is that there is, but if this is the case, right?
Yeah,
there is a component to it of how can I say, extraordinary circumstances. That maybe that is okay. They went, one, two, maybe three steps too much in using religion as.
I think so. I think they were not expecting this backlash
Right,
from
but
the younger population.
But then one would be cynical and said, well, but then all you have to do is to pull back a bit.
Right, but then I think what happens is it gets combined with other demands. It gets combined with economic demands. It gets combined with political demands, and so all of that also comes in. Do you see what I'm saying? That
Yeah.
For example, 3 years ago, in 2019, in November, the government, which was quote unquote supposedly a reformist government, but I think we later realized that it was not. They, again, because of all the sanctions that came after Trump sort of walked away from the nuclear deal, they they have always, we have had huge price controls on gas and other basic commodities. Overnight, the government tripled the price of gas. So they increased price of gas threefold over one day. The result was huge protests, often in smaller cities, poorer areas. What they did in response was they shut down the internet for 2 weeks and they killed 1,500 people.
1,500.
This is 1,500 in 2 weeks, or 2 or 3 weeks. And this is way higher than right now we don't have good estimates of exactly how many people have died in protests so far, in the past 3 months. Well, the rough numbers that I know are about 400 to 600. Those are the numbers that I know of. And so when you think about it, the crackdown back then was way harsher, and it was all for economic reasons in sort of areas that you would think that they're natural supporters. So what I'm saying is now, what started in this time around, what is started as a movement around social freedom, gets tangled with economic demands and economic freedom and political freedom at the same time.
But Ali, is there a leadership somewhere? Because practical matter one says for some kind of insurrection and popular protest to become anything that lasts and achieves result, one needs leadership, one needs some organized movement, one needs a target on one hand, but also a rifle shooting on the other. Otherwise, the regime will eventually maybe give in on a few things, modify, blah, 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 but, they're going to go back and hold the power, basically.
That's right. No, I think that's the part that I think, that's why initially I said I'm uncertain about how so this is kind of, if you ask me logically, I would say I'm very uncertain about how they are going to, how this movement is going to topple the regime. But at the same time, I'm also very uncertain about how the Iranian government can go back to what it was. meaning it's kind of like, you're hugely unpopular. How can you run the country when 70% of people directly say we don't want you? How do you sort of run the government? Is run the country? I think that's sort of the issue, that you're right.
Well,
Right
these
now,
guys
there's no
don't seem
leadership.
to care about running really the country. They care apparently between keeping their power on one hand and enforcing some kind of more or less apparent, I suppose, respect of their right. If it is, as I have the feeling it is, a predatory
Yeah.
system.
Predatory in what sense?
Predatory in the sense that they expropriate, they appropriate whatever
right.
part of the national product they can, and they care about essentially preserving the standard of living of an elite. It's not different from most dictatorship. The fact that it's religiously defined doesn't really change. I mean, there is a party here, it's the party of the clerics. There are its cadres, there are the leaders, there are the intermediary bureaucrats, and there are probably the police and the violent elements that enforce what the regime wants. But what is it? Probably 5% of the population, 10%, something like that.
We don't know, but yeah, that's my guess. 10, 15% of the population has support the current government, maybe 20. We don't know the exact numbers.
Well, I make a difference between those that support it in the sense that they're not willing to riot against it. They may dislike it, but mildly, and at the end they say, well, whatever, let's keep this thing. And those that actually actively participate and benefit from it, which I suppose is a much smaller percentage. In fact, that's also part of the question. How would you intuitively, how would you give a number to these two groups? I mean, how many are actively involved with the regime and benefit from it? And how many are there either indifferent or supportive, but not actively involved?
It's a good question. I don't think I know the answer. What I do know is that, so we have some indicators. So for example, the Revolutionary Guard has, this is sort of the quote unquote the military. So the Revolutionary Guard is basically after the revolution, the Islamic Republic was worried about military doing a coup d'etat, and so they started a new military. At the same time, they didn't want to disband the old military because they had the Saddam Iran-Iraq war going on. That's where all the sort of tanks and planes and so on and so forth were. So they created this new sort of military called kind of a parallel military. So the irony is that Iran has two official militaries. One is called the army, and the other one is called the revolutionary. So Revolutionary Guard over time, especially after the war, they participated in sort of the reconstruction projects. And so over time, they increased their grasp of the economy. So there are, of course, these are unofficial numbers, but, I would say, you could say maybe about 60% of the economy, either directly or indirectly, is owned by the Revolutionary Guard. And so we're talking about now 60% of economic activity. So, when you look at like the Tehran stock markets, the face of it, on the face of it, anybody can go and buy and sell stocks. But at the end of the day, all the sort of brokerage houses, every major holding that participates, and these are sort of major shareholdings in the stock exchange in Tehran, they're all Revolutionary Guard companies, one way or another.
I see.
So now here's the question: would you count a low-level employee or low-level engineer that works for a company that is owned by the Revolutionary Guard, supporter of the Iranian government, or not? Officially, your income is coming from there, but then at the same time, you've gone to good schools, you've got some good education, you have a nice salary, and so on and so forth. So that, I think, creates sort of exactly where does the count go, and so on and so forth.
I see. Excuse me.
But I think that number, if you just look at the, the economic activity, the 50, 60, 70% number is roughly speaking telling you how big is the grasp of them on the economy. I mean, on your earlier point about you were talking about these guys being sort of having a predatory system and so on and so forth. I think what has made them different from perhaps other dictatorships is actually the fact that over time Iranian population has become less and less religious.
Oh,
that I think is
so that's a process you see in the country taking place.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, when you
This
look
is not
at
a Tehran bias.
well, it could be when based on what I see these days from videos that are coming from every little tiny town. I mean, now, of course, again, as I said, you're right. We sort of the information is very scarce these days, and good information. We don't have good sort of data. We have lots of anecdotes. What we do see is that there is this, especially these days, there is this extreme hatred towards the clerics. One of the things, just to give you a sense, there is the thing that the turban that the clerics put on their head is called there, and so there is a movement called well, how should I say, throwing the turban is called the throwing the turban movement, where like typically these are young kids, and so if like a cleric is walking on the street, they run towards them, and then they push this thing up, and then they just throw it, and then they just run away, and then they film it, and then they post it on social media. So this is
interesting.
sure.
Good sign of disrespect.
That's right. Well, what I'm saying is, again, so some people are saying, "Oh no, this is bad," and so on. I'm just referring to it as a social sort of phenomenon. And I think this is one of the signs that, and I think really what has happened is the government increased penetration of internet very heavily about 10 years ago. About 50 million people in Iran have, I think, access to internet on their cell phones. And up until now, they have not been able to do the Chinese model of the internet, where everything is blocked and everything is filtered. They've been trying to do it, but technologically they haven't been at that level. And so I think that just creates, a flow of information. Information comes in. You get exposed to Western values. You get exposed to freedom of expression, and so on and so forth. And I think that has come together with sort of this political, domination of one party, the religious party, has created this lack of popularity of religion itself. And so people basically, I think the young guys, I don't think I've looked at the numbers. We don't have good numbers to look at. What I would say is that compared to, say, my generation or my parents' generation, the young guys who go to school are definitely less religious. They drink alcohol. They smoke weed. Weed is in Tehran everywhere.
That's a good like Coke and weed are good good ways of letting religion go, so to speak. They have a cleansing power. But anyhow, let's the West.
Yeah.
What's the role? What's the perception? What is the people want? Or
it is, again, I think it's very tricky. One that I personally, I don't know the answer. I don't have good answers. So there are a couple of things that are going on. The Iranian diaspora has a big population. I don't know if you've been. I don't know how big this news was in Europe. It wasn't covered a lot in the US, but I don't know if they covered it in Italy or not. But there was this huge gatherings of all the Iranians who, they came from everywhere in Europe, from Italy, from Germany, from England, and so on in Berlin. So there was this big sort of big gathering of it. I don't know how much it was covered in Italian media. So I think those guys, they, of course, part of the reason they're outside Iran is because they pretty much any young person who gets a good education wants to leave. That is sort of the perception these days, and the data also supports that. The number of applications that we get from Iranian students from everywhere, from any type of university, is just enormous. And I'm sure you guys have.
Sure. That part everybody's aware, which you understand. I always thought exactly. I mean, si parva licet, but it's obviously completely different circumstances. But the smart fraction always runs away if they can. It's a sign, in some sense, of desperation, right? Smart fraction tend to stick to the country if they think there is a hope of changing it, making it better, and within making the country better, getting a better life themselves. Once they think the country is not redeemable, cannot be stopped, then they say, whatever, I'm going to fix my life abroad. I get that. Wow, that's what I've done in partly, I guess, what you're doing. And so the fact that there is a huge diaspora leaving is in some sense a negative sign, if you want, from the point of view of the movement, in the sense that it is.
No, I think that's right. But then at the same time, I think what has been happening is the diaspora is pushing politicians in the West to be proactive. And so what we see, for example,
but can we be useful in any sense? Because my understanding is at the very end, the regime went up because the regime had a lot of support against the West at a certain point, at least.
Yes, I think that's right. I think at least back in the day, in '79, I think that's right. Of course, things have changed. So, for example, here is one thing that I think we need to figure out on this side of outside of Iran, which is, do we want to sign a nuclear deal with the Iranian government or not? So my personal view is that the US and European powers should not sign a nuclear deal right now, because mainly the nuclear deal is just going to empower the quote unquote thugs. It is, I think, during the Obama administration, there is sort of this team of people in the State Department, mainly, people who are sort of around John Kerry and so on, who thought that their sort of thinking was, we're going to accept Islamic Republic being what it is. We're going to sign this nuclear deal. And the Islamic Republic with an atomic bomb is a lot worse than Islamic Republic without. And so at whatever cost, we have to sign this nuclear deal. Now, it's not so that sort of calculation is not so clear anymore. Back then, we had a quote-unquote reformist government.
Because it's not obvious that the deal implies that they will not get the nuclear bomb.
That also is the case, yes. That is also the case. That, of course, already, of course, we don't have a deal right now. Still, there are mechanisms that prevent Iran from getting to a bomb, but, enrichment keeps improving. They keep managing to enrich more. There are news that they are very close. Of course, Israelis always say this, but, they also have their own agenda. So we can't quite, it's hard to sort of make up the numbers from that Israelis mentioned. They could be right. In any case, what I'm trying to say is that, maybe these days signing a nuclear deal is going to help the.
No, that I understand.
Sorry.
A deal would be a sign of recognition. My understanding, for the little I understand, is that I mean, Western government have gone that far in figuring that out, even if some European may be more tempted than other to. Europeans tend to have, as you may have learned, they have a tendency to play smart and then pretend that they're doing for the better good. But, you know, it's just a continuous tentative to rebuild some form of independent imperial power by cutting deals with the devil. But
I mean, countries have done this as far as we, you know, since ever. So
we are aware
what I'm exactly. But what I'm trying to say is that, so first of all, the response that I see these days compared to, for example, the response in 2009, the Obama administration's response, the European government's response, has been a lot harsher. In the sense that it does seem like, at least you're right, as you said, it does seem like they figured out that perhaps we shouldn't sign the deal now. Maybe we should not try to sign the deal proactively, at least. But again, when they see this, so I think if I was a US politician or a US diplomat, I would sort of sit here and think, okay, so what are the things that I have? I really hate having a nuclear Iran. Maybe I should try to sign a deal in order to stop them from having a nuclear, an atomic bomb. As you said, it's unclear that the deal can lead to that, but I think that's a calculation that at some point they might make. So one thing that they can do again is to say that as long as you're killing people on the streets, we're not going to sign the deal.
We're not going to sign.
Right. So that, I think, is a clear cut policy to have, which they can do. Now, there are other policies I think that could be helpful. For example, they can provide internet. In fact, there was, again, this was, I don't think it was very big, sort of the Starlink, Elon Musk's Starlink network. I think they sent some, they smuggled or sent some dishes to, or receivers, whatever they are. I'm not quite familiar with the technology. I just saw the news that you can find it in major cities in Iran. It has made it there, so that's something that they can do, just so that they cannot cut off the internet fully and just do what they did in 2019. Those are sort of obvious things. Beyond that, I don't think I know the answer. It's not so obvious. Some people would go and say, oh, no, we really need to basically demand the Iranian government to just stop and do a referendum, and then we're going to send their watchdogs and watch those elections and the referendum and so on and so forth. I think a lot of Iranians are kind of skeptical of foreign interventions. It's unclear how that's going to go, So bottom line, I don't think I know the answer to the question of what can the West do beyond, not, sign a nuclear deal.
Let me ask, foreign intervention.
Yeah.
Is there a memory in the leading classes of what happened, was it 63 years ago?
I think so. I think that's you mean the coup d'etat, the coup. Yes, the memory is there, especially because back then, there was a prime minister running things. He was sort of from this political party that actually won an election. The Shah back then had left the country already, and so there was this perception that we have our first democratic elected government, even though on the face of it, the Shah was there officially and so on and so forth. And so when you combine it with that, I think that still rings the bell. That combined with sort of the sentiments in '79 revolution is always been there. But again, this is for the people who are in their 60s and 70s, not for people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s.
Those
One thing that
the kids, so to speak, don't care, don't remember. It's irrelevant.
I think so. So the thing that you have to
war.
remember, yes, the thing that you have to remember that GDP in Iran in the past 10, 15 years has not grown. Iran has had there were years that had positive growth and there were years that it had negative growth. But GDP had not grown in the past 10 years. So now we're dealing with a population has been growing. We're dealing with a population that, at least for the young guys or people who are in their 30s, who've had 10 years of their adult life and they've seen no growth. And of course, when you go to Tehran, of course, Tehran looks different than other cities. And so Tehran has improved. So that means that inequality perhaps has gone up and so on and so forth. But I think this kind of, when I was saying before that, the demand for social freedom in women gets combined with economics is this observation that we have not seen growth in 10 years. And, we're dealing with an unemployment rate of 10, 15%, and so again, it is, I think the sort of the younger guys or even people who are in my age group, if they're there, again, I don't have a lot of friends anymore in Iran, but I think they're just going to look at their economic prospects, the fact that they cannot buy a house, the fact that, there is inflation of 40, 50, they have to deal with an inflation of 40, consistently have to deal with inflation of 40, 50%. This is, I think, that these are sort of the challenges that they face, and they don't see them going away. They don't see, and I think that's also part of the reason the protests, despite the regime being extremely brutal, they keep coming back. So it's everything that is happening all at the same time. It's the social freedom combined with sort of this fact that Iranians are becoming less religious and so on and so forth.
So, Ali, are you optimistic in the sense that this may lead to something within this type of, especially when it gets so violent and so oppressive, it's very hard that a protest movement lasts. This has already lasted, say, longer than the average?
Right.
Or longer than expected?
So
if I had to force you to take a guess and make something of a forecast, is there a way this can lead to a change, or is it going to be eventually repressed and lead to more misery?
So, but
I understand this is an unfair question, but
no, it is a fair question actually. So I will tell you, if you asked me 4 months ago, I would have told you that yes, there's no doubt in my mind that Islamic Republic government system is unable to run the country even inefficiently. But I don't see any alternative. I don't see people wanting change, and so I'm just going to have to deal with this, government. So I think to the extent that I observe, the thing that got me surprised, and I think other people surprised, is that the young guys basically said, we just don't care if we get shot and if we get killed, we're just going to go on the streets. Right. We don't really care.
That has been pretty impressive for everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
An old-time movement character like me, I thought, wow, these guys have got guts or desperation or a mixture of the two.
Right. So that made
are going hard.
I think that's right. So that right away made me very optimistic. Mm-hmm. So this, I think, in general, in the past 3 months, people have been sad, but for me, the way I think about it, and of course, it's really sad. You see, the numbers I told you is 400 to 500 people have died. What I didn't tell you is 60 of them have less than 18 years, are younger than 18 years old. So they're kids. 60 kids have been died. As in people as young as 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds have died in the protests. So this has been really brutal. It's been really horrible person. Just, every day we wake up, we see it in the picture of a new kid, being shot to death or being beaten to death or being beaten and so on and so forth. So that part of it, I think, is really sad. But then at the same time, going through the 2009 Green Movement, I see this one and it makes me very optimistic, actually, because it does seem like there's huge demand and real demand by people who just do not want to tolerate this government. So, you've done work on political economy, and macro and so on and so forth. By no measure, by no standard, the Iranian government is a democracy. On the face of it, it is. Now, in a few years, they're gonna have to go and, people are gonna have to go and vote for members of parliament. How are they going to do that? How are they going to get people to come to the polls? It's kind of their bread and butter. This is, there is a huge push for people to participate in an election every time there is an election. I just do not see people being enthusiastic participating. And so, given that that's been the model, that's been in the past 45 years, that's been the model. We sort of, yes, we are unpopular. We are being really cruel to minorities. We are really being brutal to political dissidents. But we try to sort of get the median voter to show up on the polls and so on and so forth. I think that is gone. I just do not see people going back to the polls to vote for another president or another member of parliament.
So your forecast,
I could be wrong about
this
that.
is going to continue until some form of organized opposition takes over?
I mean, that's the part I think that creates
the mode of the distribution of scenarios.
Yes, the key thing that creates uncertainty is the lack of leadership, is what you mentioned. That everybody's in jail, and so I think one of the things that, again, I think there's debate about that. I've been meaning to read more into this, but I haven't had a chance. But I think social media, there is a theory out there that social media makes protesting easier, but makes organization of long-term political movements harder, especially in oppressive regimes, because they use misinformation, they create noise, they control literally how people communicate with each other. And so there is, I think, one of the things that makes me worried is this fact that by using, the Iranian government is great at misinformation campaigns. They're very good at spreading noise on social media, and they have really complicated strategies of just discrediting any opposition. And so that, I think, is what creates doubt for me. That's why I can't tell you for sure. Yes, I don't see these guys, staying in power another year. So I think the range is really, really wide. Hopefully, my hope is that at some point people can sort of organize their demands into creating leadership. There are labor movements, there are labor unions. My hope is that labor unions and student unions can kind of, because
so labor unions are not controlled by the regime. I would expect them to be.
No, so that I think, in fact, teachers unions, factory workers unions, manufacturers unions, they've been, in fact, because of all these sort of economic problems, these were the guys who were, in the past sort of 12, 13 years, any voice of opposition, a tiny voice of opposition, has been coming out of unions.
I see.
And so my hope is that that the union, the student union, the labor union would be able to create leadership and organization. But again, it's difficult because anybody who is anybody is in jail. We have 18,000 people being arrested.
18,000.
Jail. Yes. And they just, randomly, they just arrest people and, either give them sentences or, just free them on bail and so on and so forth. So they have these strategies of basically just arresting anybody who potentially can be sort of a leader.
Okay, well, something else you want to our Italian listener to know that I have not asked or I have not inquired or didn't come up?
No, the only thing is that I miss Italy. I've been going to Italy for the past 10 years.
Well, I didn't catch that. It came through a bit.
No, the only thing I would say is that I miss Italy.
Well, you can go there.
I still can go. I've been going there for 10 years.
It's not on the top of things, but it's still
I know. No, but I do think we need to give voice to these protesters. That's why anybody who tells me I should go and talk, I happily jump in, because I do think that these guys are just they're doing something really noble, which is, they're just saying, I just don't care if I get killed. We just need to do something for the greater good, to the extent that as economists we believe in.
I totally agree with that.
And so I do think that, the least we can do is sort of create sort of awareness. And I think awareness actually has been better than pretty much any other time. But I do think that, we need to create ways of communicating with people inside Iran. This is the part that I think is what we're worried about. I think many people are worried about another full internet shutdown, which basically puts, make the country dark and then allows them to do whatever they want, like in 2019. Yeah. The chance of that happening.
Well, the feeling we have, to tell you the truth, on this channel, where we try to work hard to beat a bit both the fake news and misrepresentation, disinformation, coming from various sources. The impression we have is that, in fact, the European press, the European media, are actually not paying enough attention to the Iranian revolution, not reporting as, how can I say, closely, clearly, and intensively as they should. That's partly one of the reasons why I set out, and other friends have set out to.
I see.
Talk to other
so there is no like Corriere della Sera is not covering those.
No. If you go to the first pages of the Italian papers, you will see that in fact the attention to that is very limited. Very limited, indeed. Very limited. Certainly below what the relevance of the whole thing would suggest.
Right. No, I think the U.S. is somewhat similar.
Also in the U.S. there is not much. There's a bit more depending. Depending on the groups, but also in the U.S. there is a sense. I don't know. Part of the thing seems to be that. Part of this, the belief that there is no hope. People have given up on. There's an attitude of saying, well, the regime is there; it's going to stay, and therefore, let's hope this ends, and then there's nothing you can do, right? So that's why I kept asking about your view, and I think it's important. It would be important also at political level if, obviously, governments have their own means of evaluating situation, and you and I have only very small influence, but the shifting from the belief. See, it's the analogies of Ukraine, right? People had given up on Ukraine in February. Miraculously, the Ukrainian resisted alone, and then people in the West said, "Well, maybe we can help them." But if you think what the attitude was on February 23rd or February 25th was, well,
I see.
Too bad, but you know, the Russians are
Right.
strong, violent, they're going in. We'll have to put up with that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. I see.
And I think
the
there is a
parallel.
similar attitude, even compounded with Iran. You know, well, yes, but too bad. Nothing we can do with that. And maybe so
Well, I would.
talking about
Yeah.
it
The
and
only
having
thing.
evidence that
Yeah,
the
I see.
insurrection may succeed would be very useful to help the people that are doing the insurrection.
Right. No, I see your point. You know, I would say the one thing that I think goes for, especially people in Europe, is that I think a democratic Iran is fantastic. That would be a fantastic ally for Europe. It's sort of
Oh, absolutely.
in
It
that
would
region.
change
It's the most.
completely. You see, that's the long-term mistake there. That 59 coup is that the Western chose to overthrow and made an enemy overthrow the one government that probably was most reliable, though, with which you could play better, maybe that and the Egyptian at the time, and therefore in the long run throw the country in the direction it's gone. So I
Right.
totally agree with you.
Right. Yeah. So hopefully, I do really thank you for doing.
Oh, thank you for your time, Ali.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
maybe we'll do an update sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Hopefully a good one.
Yeah, hopefully to bring good news, right? To evaluate
Exactly.
the good news of a better situation. All right,
Great.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you.